everybody. Welcome to another episode of the No BS Spiritual Book Club's Face to Face with Live 10 Best Spiritual Books video series. This is the series in which our contributors join me to share the stories behind the books that influence them the most on their spiritual journey. And this week we're face to face with Glenn Harrold, whose life journey from rebellious youth and expulsion from school to fleeting stardom in a punk rock band, to near death from drugs and alcohol abuse, to then clawing his way back to health and fame as one of the world's most successful hypnotherapists and self-help audio authors, is one heck of a raw and colourful story in its own right. Glenn, you should be writing a book about your own story. And Glenn will be sharing the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that triggered his spiritual awakening, expanded his consciousness, and helped him find new meaning on his spiritual path. So before we begin, two important things. We all know that Zoom has been in the news lately. There's been all kinds of hacks and strange things going on, and they have upgraded their security. So we should be safe from that. Let's just set an intention. But they're also being just swamped with people using it. So that is causing some outages in some places. So again, let's just set a collective intention that we are not going to have any interruptions today. And if we do, we'll edit those parts out before we post this recording on the website and in our other media outlets. And feel free to post any questions you have for Glenn in the chat window with your name and your location, and Sharon will collate them and keep them till we get to that part of the event. So with all that done, Glenn, welcome.
Hello, Sandie. It's good to speak to you again.
You too, Glenn. We can't go on meeting like this, you know.
In these strange little boxes on our computer.
Yeah, I know.
It's weird, isn't it?
Amazing, isn't it? All these friendships that spring up around the world, and we've never met one another actually face to face in the same room.
We haven't, have we? No.
Things carry on as they are. We may never get to. But thank you. Thank you for agreeing to share the stories behind the books that have moved you most on your spiritual journey. And I usually kick off by asking guests to tell us a little bit about how easy or how challenging it was to pick your 10 most influential spiritual books.
Once I got into it, I found it quite easy because I've been on this path for probably 25 years. And a big part of, waking up spiritually is reading a lot of books, that inspire you and, give you more knowledge and wisdom. So when I looked back, it was quite easy. I found it, a good therapeutic thing to do, to go over those old books.
Did it bring back lots of memories?
Yeah, it did. Because sometimes when you find a book that you absolutely love and you get immersed in it, you can't, it's that thing where you can't wait to read it the next day. You're sort of, you binge read it. And, I reconnected with that feeling again when I looked through these books. And there were certain books that I just adored, because they taught me so much and, helped to change my life in many ways. So it was a great exercise, yeah.
Were there lots of extra books that you really had to whittle down?
Yeah, there were a couple of others that I could have put on the list. So I kind of played with the list a little bit and then nailed it down to the 10, and it felt like that was the right list.
Good. I'm glad it felt right. Okay, well, let's get going with your first one. And, when you first gave me your list for your page on the website, I don't know if they were in any particular order, but I put them up in ways that they balanced one another on the page. And today I've kind of moved your list around a bit, so I hope that's okay. But the first book is one that crops up again and again, no surprises here. Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, published in 1946. What a book.
It's a great book, isn't it? And one of those that's got a real depth to it. There's so much deep wisdom and knowledge in it. I actually read the book a number of years ago, And I've just recently started listening to the audio book on Audible, and it's narrated by Ben Kingsley. So, you know, that's pretty amazing. His fantastic voice telling this incredible story again. So I'm kind of, I've only just started it actually, only the last couple of weeks been listening to it, but it's really powerful.
How did you come across this book?
How did I come across it? I think it was just hearing about it. I just kept hearing about this book and how special it was. And a lot of people that I looked up to were talking about it. And I got it and started to read it. And it's quite a heavy going book. It's not the easiest book to read because, it was written almost 100 years ago. It's quite an old book. And a lot of the phraseology in the book is quite a little bit unusual. So it's one of those books you read a paragraph and you kind of think, oh, there's a lot in that. And then you go back and read it again. So I was, a bit slow reading it, but it's one of those, you hope you take a lot of the wisdom and knowledge from it because it's got a lot of power and a lot of meaning. And he was, his journey was incredible as well, going from such a humble background in India, but knowing at an early age he had a mission to, spread consciousness and enlightenment around the world. It was, and the way that he did it, he didn't have any great plan. It was just, he was just a seeker, wasn't he? He just immersed himself in, knowledge and wisdom through meeting different teachers and spending and going off and doing things at random. Hear about something in a village miles away, hear about a teacher, 1,000 miles away in a different place in India, and he'd travel all that distance at those times, which weren't easy in India, and he'd go there and just hang out with this master and absorb all that knowledge and wisdom and then take it back with him, and I love that.
Commitment. I love the comment you made when you sent the list to me, and this is the book about which George Harrison said, "Before I read this, my life was meaningless." And to use the phrase that you wrote, and he was in the Beatles, and his life was meaningless.
George Harrison was in the Beatles, and he said that before he read this book, his life was meaningless. So you think, George was an amazing human being. I'm going to talk about him with another book because it's an important part of his story in another book. But he was an amazing human being, and the fact that he was so awakened by this book and by other things at that time had a massive influence around the world, because the Beatles were the biggest band in the world at that time, and they probably still are now. There's no one that's been bigger than the Beatles. And their influence was so far-reaching, and they were so powerful. And the fact he was talking about these things in the late 60s and early 70s was just amazing, and it gave that whole sort of spiritual movement so much power, and it reached so many more people through their message, through George's words. And I love that. I love that he said that.
When I read that book, when I first came to America and I was living in San Diego, I was just down the road from the Self-Realization Fellowship. There were two in California, one in LA and one in near San Diego. And I used to go there quite a bit because their gardens were just beautiful and a lovely place to wander and meditate. But I bought the book then. And I remember being offered that book free at airports for years before that. There were all these, Indian people, who were obviously devotees who were giving this book away free. But I didn't get it until I lived in San Diego. And I was just blown away by the story. His commitment, by the teachers, the people that he met, and some of the things that he revealed. But I've got to be really shallow and tell you something that really sticks out in my mind about that book, because it just gobsmacked me. He had a sister, and his sister was rather overweight, and he actually said to her, "Well, tomorrow you won't be." words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And she got up the next day and she wasn't. And I thought, I want that. I want some of that. And it was just, you know, how could somebody do something like that? And he was teaching us that we can manifest anything. We
Yeah.
can manifest anything.
Yeah.
Just astonishing.
It's amazing, isn't it? You know, when you hear stories like that of these Indian gurus who dedicated their life to spirituality and how their manifestation abilities are so heightened and so refined. You know, there was always like watching those videos of Sai Baba, who would, you know, be able to manifest things in his hand and gold and all that kind of thing. I was kind of very taken with him back in the day. Yeah, it was a lot of strange stories came out about him afterwards, but
yeah,
it seemed that, you know, I believe that, you know, because I'm big into manifesting. I always have been, and you know, and I've found that the more connected I am to my spirituality, the easier I can manifest things.
yes.
You know, you're a clearer channel, and your projections are so much stronger when you're deep in that. So it makes perfect sense to me. And somebody like, you know, Yogananda, his powers of manifestation must have been incredible. And yeah, I didn't know that about his sister. That's an amazing story.
It's in the book.
Yeah.
It is in the book, yeah.
That would make my weight loss courses quite amazing. So I'm going to keep
exactly.
working. I'll probably never get to that level, but it's good. It's great, isn't it?
Yeah. So book number 2 is about one of my heroes, Wizard, Life and Times of Nikola Tesla by Mark J. Seifer. That was published in 1996. It's a bit of a silly question to say, what do you like and admire about Tesla? Because, you know, there's so much to like and admire about that man. But yeah, what did that book do for you?
Well, it's amazing because when I discovered Tesla, the thing that absolutely blew my socks off was that why hadn't I learnt about him in school? Why wasn't he the number one, you know, scientist and inventor that I learnt about? It just blew my mind. And there's a great quote by Einstein when he was once asked, what's it like to be the greatest inventor in the world? And he said, I don't know, you'll have to ask Nikola Tesla. And Einstein was a very humble man. You know, he was very spiritually attuned, and, you know, it's no wonder he said that. But yeah, it always amazed me that I didn't know about him. I hadn't learnt about him, because he virtually invented the 20th century single-handed. You know, he was, you know, he invented the radio, didn't he? It was we learnt in school it was Marconi.
Marconi, yeah.
It wasn't. It was posthumously given to Tesla. He'd invented it, and Marconi had nicked it off him later on. That was the story.
Everybody nicked everything off of him, didn't they?
They did. They did. And, you know, and he wasn't a businessman. That was his thing. He was just, he came to this planet to give the world so much. And, you know, at a time when he struggled because he wasn't a businessman. And a lot of the business people of the day, the bankers, the oil barons and that, you know, were at odds with, his inventions were at odds with their interests. Yeah. Because it was all about us getting plugged into the grid. You know, same as it is now. It's the same old crap we're facing now. You know, and Tesla, I just loved that he was a humanitarian, and he would have worked for free. You know, he was offered huge contracts with lots of money, but he wasn't interested unless it was for the good of humankind. And he was a very, very special human being. And if he'd have been backed by the, you know, the bankers of the day, you know, we'd have probably had mobile phones 100 years ago. Because there's a quote from him in the 20s back then where he was talking about, you know, the possibility of having a device in your pocket that would have all the knowledge in the world, all the information, and you'd be able to communicate with this device with other people around the world. And he was talking about mobile phones back then. Yeah. And, you know, so it's a tragedy that he wasn't backed like he should have been. And we learned about people like Edison in school. And, you know, the only reason Edison got in the history books is because he was a Mason, he was connected with the bankers, and, you know, that was it, you know, and it's the same old story of corruption, you know, a great man on this planet.
I think the thing is a driven genius like that, who's come here with a very clear desire and motivation and impetus. You know, all he cared about was being able to produce and produce and produce.
Yeah.
And, you know, the books I read, he allowed Edison to literally buy his patents as long as he kept him, you know, going, as long as he had his lab and he could work and he had the tools and the equipment he needed. He just let him take everything.
Yeah.
And really
He,
shot himself in the foot.
even to the point, I read in one of his books that he was celibate. He was completely celibate for all of his life because he didn't want that side of his character to be to take away from what he was here to do. So he was so dedicated and so on a mission that that was just not a part of his life. And yeah, his story is incredible when you think of, you know, with the alternating current that we use in our house is, you know, something we've still got today. X-ray.
So much.
So many things. You know,
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Neon lamps.
It's only now with the internet that he's getting the full credit, isn't he?
Yes.
You know, a lot of people have woken up, and for me that was always the shocking thing, that I just hadn't heard about him before I started to research him on the internet. And,
book number 3. This brought a smile to my face. 2012 and Beyond, an invitation to meet the challenges and opportunities ahead, by Diana Cooper, 2009. I actually interviewed Diana about that book in, I think it was 2010. So I'm intrigued why it's on your list.
I'd always liked Diana's work, and I remember that book. I bought it around the time coming up to 2012, and it was very relevant then because she, you know, wrote a lot about what to expect at that time. Because, you know, that was another crazy time, wasn't it? People didn't know if we were going to suddenly hit a brick wall, and, you know, there'd be, the computers would stop, and, you know, you wouldn't be able to get money out of the bank and that kind of thing. It was that uncertain time again, wasn't it? But she wrote about it so well and explained that it was, you know, the start of a shift in our consciousness, this awakening that has continued to this day. And, you know, so many of her predictions in that book have come true. You know, this quickening, this ascension that's happening now. And you can really feel it now more than ever. You know, with what's going on in the world, it feels like we are in the middle of this ascension, and you can feel this energy, this quickening. You know, this change in vibration.
I mean, one of the things I remember about that book, she pretty much covered every single country or region in the world and was saying, here's what's going to happen to them. And I remember her talking about come 2020, you know, things weren't really going to start, you know, easing out, you know, between 20 and 25. And of course, that seems so far away. And here we are. But one of the things that I remember about her book, she talked about England as having 2 of the chakras of the world, 2 of the chakras, and one in London, I think it was, and one in Glastonbury. And then 2 years later, we had the Olympics in London. And I remember watching. I didn't want to wait up until America got it. So I had my Skype on, and I was Skyping my son in London, and I was watching his television through Skype so that I could see the Olympic opening ceremony. And what really struck me was they had a kind of model, a representation of Glastonbury Tower. And every single one of these countries came in with, you know, what was virtually a lamp. And they stuck this lamp into the ground that was representing Glastonbury Tower. And I remember thinking, oh my God, Diana said it was the heart center, you know, the heart chakra of the world. And they don't know. They're all putting the light into the heart chakra. And what's going to happen now? And I just found that so profound.
Just to say, that's a really interesting point, because Yeah, the Glastonbury tour is, she said it was the heart chakra of the world. In the book, you reminded me of that. She talked about that and how powerful that center is. And on the basis of reading that in the book, I went down to the tour and I stood on it. And when you stand at the top of the tour, I went there with Nicola, my wife, and it was a quiet day. I remember it being really quiet. The weather wasn't great. And we stood at the top of it, and I felt this surge of energy coming up through the ground. You know, and I'm not one of those who's, you know, really energy sensitive in that way. You know, I have to really tune into it.
Let's move on to book 4, which Born to Run, The Hidden Tribe, The Ultra Runners and the Greatest Race the World Has Never Seen, by Christopher McDougall, published in 2010. How is that book on a spiritual list?
It's not an overtly spiritual book, but it's more about, you know, feats of endurance. And it was one of those books somebody recommended to me, and it was such a page turner, and everyone I've recommended to has had the same experience. You know, you just love this book. It's just one of those you look forward to reading the next part every day, because it's about, I have to refer to my notes because I've never pronounced this. The Tara are a tribe of Indians that live in the remote canyons in Mexico. And they were kind of famed for being able to run these incredible distances at lightning speeds. And so news of this kind of filtered up to the US, and, you know, some of the top endurance runners heard about it. And they went down there to sort of hang out with the Indians and kind of find out the secrets, you know, what was going on. And, you know, these guys were the top endurance runners in the world, in the Western world. And when they went down and spent time with these Indians, they just couldn't match them. They were nowhere near. And so they tried to figure out what's the secret. And it was a lot to do with their diet and the way that they lived. You know, they lived these very austere lives, and their traditions had carried on for sort of generations, where they needed to run long distances to, you know, to live and survive, you know, to get food and that kind of thing. So it was, you know, similar to the Kenyan runners in Africa. You know, it's kind of hardwired into their culture to run. And the book is about the story of these American guys who go down there. And there was one guy called Caballero Blanco, who was an amazing runner himself. And he went down there and he ended up living with the Indians and living like they do. And he was an albino guy, which kind of made the story even more colorful. And he learned to run with them and live with them and be amongst them. And whenever he came back to America, he'd be able to beat all the guys he used to race against, you know, and he was, you know, became like the Tarahumara. He became like those guys. And it's, yeah, there's something, even though it's not a spiritual book in itself, there's a lot of, you know, the guys that live amongst the Indians have spiritual experiences. They have these amazing experiences because they're immersed in that culture and just taken with that lifestyle. And yeah, it's a brilliant book. It's so well written and easy to read. And you know,
I know that you're a real health, you know, addict, and you lead a very healthy lifestyle, and you know, you're very athletic, and that wasn't always the way, especially when you were young and in your wild days. Was part of what they do, did that inspire you even more, you know, in your fitness regime and the way you eat and live?
Yeah, I've always admired people who do things to the extreme. And the other thing with these guys, the thing I've missed, is that they were vegan. They didn't eat meat, so they just lived on, you know, a vegan diet. And a lot of the ultra runners in America, because it kind of opened me up to learning about ultra running, which is, and it's quite a big sport. You know, you don't see much of it on TV, but it's where, you know, you have these races, these endurance races, often, you know, through rough terrain. And these guys, you know, doing things that you can't think is possible, you know, running literally for 18 hours a day, you know, over 5 days. And, you know, and there's quite a, it's more, they do it more for the kudos and the, what is it, that's kind of, you know, the inner feel-good factor rather than for fame and fortune.
Yeah.
So I love that side of it. It's not a big commercial sport, but it's very well respected, you know, by other sports. And so yeah, for me, you know, I'd love to be able to do that, you know, but you know.
Well, it's such a discipline, isn't it? And I mean, it reminds you of what yogis and lamas can do.
Yeah.
You know, they can do the most amazing physical feats.
Yeah.
And this is really about discipline and focus and
It's
concentration.
exactly, yeah, it's mind over matter.
Yes.
You know, being able to push your body to those kind of limits. And I've always been fascinated by that, you know, pushing yourself to the nth degree and, you know, overcoming adversity and, you know, yeah, that seeing what we're capable of. And so I totally admire people who do that, you know, and, you know, these runners, the runners in this book, you know, do that amazingly. There's one guy called Scott Jurek, and he was the top ultra runner for quite a long time. And he was vegan, you know, vegan all the way. So, and he kind of showed that you could, you know, do these superhuman feats on just a plant-based diet. So, and I think he turned a lot of other sportsmen in other sports onto the fact that you could do these things. You know, like Novak Djokovic is now vegan. You know, he's the #1 tennis player in the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, I bet if you asked him, his story would go back to, you know, Scott Jurek and these guys.
Many athletes are becoming vegan now. And of course, mind over matter, you know, that's what you do. You know, as a hypnotherapist, you know all about that.
Yeah, yeah, and it works. It works when you know, they say we're the only species on the planet that doesn't use all of our brain all of the time. So we've got this, you know, incredible resource within us that we can tap into through meditation and altered states of consciousness that give us this superhuman ability. So, you know, I love that. The guy Wim Hof, who's very popular at the moment, you know, he showed through a specific breathing technique how you can, you know, be in freezing cold water and swim long distances, you know, just through meditation.
Yeah.
You know, he's an amazing guy, you know, and yeah, so I love those kind of stories.
Number 5, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I mean, that came up last week, of the week before, I think it is, with Meeting. It's come up so many times. It's actually my bookworm this month as well, because it was a very pivotal, I mean, life-changing in many respects and mind-changing book for me. So when you first read that book, how did it impact you?
I think with that book, it was, you know, it's a huge book, wasn't it? And I think it was because the timing of it was perfect. You know, there's something about certain books like Louise Hays' Heal Your Life and The Power of Now that just sort of capture the zeitgeist, you know, the mood of people at the time. And I remember reading that book, and, you know, the core of it is about being mindful and being present and living your life in the moment. And, you know, to write a book on that and to connect with people the way that he did was quite amazing, you know, because throughout the book, he's pretty much saying the same thing over and over, but he's doing it in, you know, amazing, very creative ways.
Yeah.
And it's so true. You know, a lot of the pain that we create within our minds is because of, you know, the worry of the past, you know, the anxiety from the past and worrying about the future.
Yeah.
You know, but if you just live your life in the moment, in the present moment, you know, life is beautiful. You know, it's amazing. And, you know, as soon as this, you know, latest chaos in the world started, I started to flip into that a lot more, just being in the moment, enjoying every second and not worrying about the future and, you know, just being in the now. And it's a really good place to be, you know, because you don't have any worries or cares when you live in the moment. You know, and I've got 2 little kids of 5 and 3. And, and they're just so present. They do it. You know, they've got Eckhart's teachings down to a T. You know, they are interested in is what's happening now and what, you know, what to play with and what to do.
Yeah.
And it's good. And I actually I met Eckhart out in Malibu. I went to one of his talks out there because we were with the same app developer at the time. And because of that, the guy said to me, "Do you want to meet Eckhart? You can have a, you know, private chat with him afterwards." And so we both went out the back and we sat in a room for like half an hour and we just talked. And it was really nice to meet him in that way because, you know, he wrote the book, and, you know, like most stories like this, it didn't get a lot of traction straight away. It was a bit of a struggle. And he talked about how before that he was homeless for a little while, and he was sleeping on a park bench in Regent's Park.
Yes.
And I think, it's funny you say that because I slept rough a few times when I was a kid. So
On a bench in Regent's Park?
no, it wasn't as posh as that. It was in shop doorways in Bromley and train stations. So that was it. But we talked about those things, and it was really, you know, and I forgot he was Eckhart Tolle for a while. It was lovely.
Yeah.
You know, we just chatted away, and I kind of, you know, had that meeting with him, and, you know, had sort of access to his sort of inner workings through the connection that I had at the time. And he was one of those teachers that is totally authentic. You know, he wasn't showbiz or Hollywood at all. You know, he was very, very grounded. And, you know, when he came out and spoke on stage, he was, you know, it was authentic. His words and, you know, what he was saying had real meaning and power because there was truth it was in aligned with the way he was. You know, that Gandhi quote, you know, be aligned in thought, action and deed, word, action and deed. And, you know, Eckhart was that. He's still one of my favourite teachers because, you know, he's a very humble, authentic man.
Yeah. So book number 6, I have to say that when I first got your list, and you were one of the first, you know, that we put up on the book club some months ago, there was a name on your list, and I thought, I've heard so much about this man and I've never read any of his books. So I need to do it now. And it was coming at me from several different sources, not just from you. I was receiving information. And having read this particular one, I can understand why it made such an impact on you. And it is The Trick to Money is Having Some by Stuart Wilde, written in 1995. And you say that this book, more than any other, propelled you into an abundant and successful life. So tell us about that.
Yeah, this book had a really big impact on me at the time because it taught me that money is just an energy. You know, it's just an energetic force. And, you know, the core teaching in that book was that if you want, you know, there's enough money in the world for every one of us to be as rich as we want to be. And you've just got to step up and collect it. And, you know, I love that kind of teaching because it was so alien to what I'd ever been taught about money before, you know, and I was, you know, up to that point, I'd struggled all my life. I'd been broke and, you know, driven about in old bangers, lived in really crappy flats in South London. And, you know, so it was a real struggle up to that point. So that book completely changed my way of thinking and you know, taught me that you can really be abundant, but you've got to believe it. You've got to resonate with it on every level. And one of the things he had in the book that stayed with me, he said that if ever you see money on the floor, even if it's a cent, pick it up because you're affirming to the universe that money comes easily to you and it's there everywhere. So even to this day, if I see a coin on the floor, no matter how dirty it is or whatever, I'll pick it up and put it in the pocket. And that's down to Stewie. He was an amazing man. I saw him live a number of times, and, you know, he was such a maverick. You know, sometimes you never knew what you get with him because he was, you know, like his name, he was very wild at times.
Wild, yeah.
You know, and he'd curse and swear on stage and, you know, but I loved that wild side of him. You know, it really spoke to me because he was very grounded. You know, he'd grown up, he was born in South Africa, but he'd spent his younger life in London, and he'd made a lot of money when he was young. But then he had this spiritual awakening and had a thirst for knowledge, and that was his journey. And he was a very, very good teacher and a very interesting character, because, you know, his books later on, they kind of got a bit weirder. You know, he was, I know he was very, very deep into ayahuasca and, you know, plant medicine. And, you know, I've experienced that a few times myself and had amazing experiences with it. But by his own account, he'd literally done hundreds of them. And I noticed towards the end of his life, his teachings were a little bit out there, you know, kind of hard to grasp. And, you know, he used to talk about, you know, when you did yoga, that you'd have ghouls and entities that if you sat on the floor, they'd crawl up your bum and they'd become... And, you know, you're thinking, where's he gone with this? You know, it was like really strange. But, you know, I just loved, you know, sometimes people blow your mind, and, you know, it's all part of their teaching, the way they are. And you don't always get it. But, yeah, he was a very colourful, interesting character.
Well, you know, being a hypnotherapist, you'll also know about provocative therapy. And, you know, I mean, in a way, to have a spiritual teacher who is anything but acting anything but what we expect of a spiritual teacher, you know, the language, the behavior, etc. I mean, that's provocative therapy in itself, and that can shift people without anything else.
That was his gift. You know, he could shift you really quickly because he was like that, because he was a provocateur.
Yeah,
that's a really good way of looking at it. And yeah, you know, I always, you know, enjoyed his stuff. And, you know, bless him, he passed away a couple of years ago, didn't he? He suddenly had a heart attack.
He did. Yeah.
And it was a strange one. You know, his journey was strange, because at the end he was, you know, he was quite overweight. And I know I used to post videos on YouTube where he was smoking and talking about self-discipline at the same time. It didn't quite marry, but it was all part of his mystique and enigma that he was.
Yeah. Well, you had another book on your list by Stuart, which was Infinite Self, 33 Steps to Reclaiming Your Inner Power, published in 1997.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an interesting one. It was, the 33 steps were based on that number, because he always said it was a very special number, a very spiritual number. And, you know, he said it was the age that Christ was when he was crucified, and so it had a lot of spiritual significance. And the 33 steps were, it was kind of a little bit of a workbook, you know, so you'd work through the steps, and it was a kind of a practical guide. So yeah, that was another one of my favorites. I kind of felt I had to include two of his because he was such an influence on me. And, but I think The Trick to Money was the one that really changed things for me. You know, it took me into, you know, a world of, you know, unlimited possibilities.
Yes.
And I really, you know, from that book, I got into, you know, really deep meditation about, you know, what I wanted. I got really focused on, you know, and that's that point. I was quite young. I was materialistic. So I wanted to have a big £1 million house. I wanted to have an Aston Martin. I wanted to have a villa in Florida. It was all about the material goals. And, you know, using the techniques I learned in that book, I used to visualize them every single day. And, you know, my wife at the time, she said I got so deep into it, the bed would actually be vibrating because my meditations were so deep and I got so lost in it. And I was at a point then when I was, you know, I'd struggled for so long that I was desperate to change my life. And it also had to be, I didn't just want to make money for the sake of it. I wanted to be abundant, truly abundant. And I wanted to be doing something worthwhile. You know, for me, I could never do something that for any amount of money, if it didn't mean something. Yeah. And I'm still like that now. You know, there has to be an end to it, an end goal, a positive end goal. It has to be something that's, you know, for my higher good and for the good of the world. So that was what I meditated on. I kind of immersed myself in that, and I was doing the affirmations that I'm always in the right place at the right time. Abundance comes freely and naturally to me. All of my needs are constantly met. And I was driving a minicab around the West End at the time at night, and I used to, in between jobs, I'd be doing these affirmations and mantras. And that book, you know, that's why that book influenced me so much, because I just immersed myself in those teachings, and I believed in it. You know, it was a leap of faith. I didn't know I was going to end up with all these things, but, you know, I just immersed myself in it. And, you know, little by little, you know, I was able to manifest all of those things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Well, to do anything, we have to believe it's possible. And clearly he showed you possibilities that just hadn't been in your, you know, field before.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, he really spoke to me, just his language and the attitude he had. He was very brave and he was very bold.
Yeah.
He had a lot of courage, and I love that. I love people who are courageous and don't care. You know, as long as they're doing something good, you know, he had that, and along with the wisdom.
Well, Book 8 is a complete contrast. The Bhagavad Gita, a walkthrough for Westerners by Jack Hawley. You couldn't get more of a contrast, really, could you?
No. That book is an amazing book, an amazing book because of the story behind it. And you know, the Bhagavad Gita, the teachings in it have been around, you know, for thousands and thousands of years. They, you know, they come from very sacred texts. And the story of it was that Prabhupada was told, he was a gentleman that lived in India. I think he was born in around the turn of early 1900s. And he was similar to Yogananda. He was on a mission to spread consciousness around the world. And he was told that by his teacher back in the 30s and 40s. And, you know, as he got older and older, it seemed less likely that he'd do this. But in the 60s, he was told by his guru that his children had grown up by then, and he was 69 when he got on a boat to America with the Bhagavad Gita and had 2 heart attacks on this boat. He had very little money and he didn't know anyone in America. And he had this, all he wanted to do was spread this consciousness to America because his teacher told him that the West was in bad need of it. So he went over there, arrived in New York, and it was a kind of, the late 60s when the counterculture revolution was going on, and, you know, people were waking up and dropping a lot of acid and that kind of thing. And he arrived at this time, and he would walk the streets of New York chanting the Hare Krishna chant. And it was the hippies and the sort of freaks of the time that got him, you know, that tuned into him first. And he taught them that, you know, true enlightenment wasn't through dropping acid, it was through chanting. And so his following came from that initially. And, you know, from that little following, they'd all go out in the streets and chant, and then some artists and musicians got into them, and the whole thing built a momentum. And then George Harrison and John Lennon, you know, tuned into them. And it was said that they came to London and they got in touch with George. And when they got in touch with him, they found out that George had been reading the Bhagavad Gita. So he was already on their wavelength. And, you know, and then so George was hanging out with them, and John put them up at his home in Tittenhurst Park in Surrey. So that was their first place of stay in the UK.
Oh.
You know, so the Beatles, at the height of their fame and popularity, suddenly took on these teachings and then popularized them to the world. And, you know, in 1969, I think it was, George recorded a Hare Krishna chant, and the song got to number 10 in the charts, you know, because the Beatles could put out anything they wanted and it charted.
Yes.
And they reckon even at football matches, the fans were singing the Hare Krishna chant because of that. So that movement got such an uplift from George and John, and to the point where George bought them the Hare Krishna temple in the UK. And I've been to this temple, the manor it's called, not far from Harrold. And I've been there to the annual Hare Krishna festival. And in that garden, every year there are 80,000 Hare Krishnas singing, dancing and chanting, and it's one of the most amazing experiences. You know, I felt so uplifted when I was there. And, you know, the manor itself is probably worth £50 million now.
Wow.
And George had given that to them in the 60s. He just gave it to them. You know, so his legacy is just unbelievable, you know, what he did. And the Krishna movement itself is an amazing thing because, you know, there are now temples all around the world. And Prabhupada, when the movement got going, you know, he wasn't just this amazing spiritual teacher. He also had a good business brain, and he set up, he's, you know, he taught his devotees to go out and set up temples around the world. And they did, and all the temples were autonomous. So there wasn't a hierarchy. He knew that if there was a hierarchy, it would end up like all hierarchies do, greed and corruption and falling apart.
Yeah, yeah.
So he set them up autonomously, and that's why they're still thriving today. You know, and the Krishna guys, they're out on the streets feeding the homeless, and their main teaching is about being of service and being heart-centered, being, you know, and my son's a part of the Krishna movement. You know, he's been out to India, to Vrindavan, and been to the spiritual epicenter there. And, you know, he said to me at times, he's been at these groups and he's been chanting, and he said to me, he's phoned me up and he said, Daddy, he said, I felt that nectar, that sweetness, you know, that beauty when you get this spiritual awakening, this higher consciousness feeling. And you get that through the Hare Krishna chant. And I've never experienced it myself, but Lee said he's felt it a couple of times because he's immersed himself in that. So, you know, Prabhupada, you think back, Prabhupada came over on a boat in, you know, the late 60s or the mid 60s. He was 69 years of age with no money, 2 heart attacks. And he set up this movement. For me, you know, this is the biggest success story of our times, because the Krishna movement has such an amazing impact around the world and does so much good. And it's a very pure movement. There's, you know, because there's not this hierarchy. So, yeah, this was, you know, one of my favourite books.
Stories like that, I mean, you know, never doubt that one person can change the world.
Yeah.
And we all need to take that on board, because that one person could be me, it could be you, it could be any of us. You know, we have to, you know, whatever we are moved to do, we've just got to believe we can do it.
Yeah. And looking at people like him, there's such an inspiration. You think if he can do what he did, you know, then it just gives you that same inspiration.
Indeed, yeah. Okay, let's go on to number 9. Another book that comes up a lot. This lady really has changed things for many people. Louise Hays, You Can Heal Your Life.
Yeah.
Again, you know, another woman who has changed so many mindsets, so many. When did you come across this book, and what was the standout point from this book for you?
I think it was very early on. It probably was about 1990. So what's that, 30 odd years ago? Yeah, it was around that time, you know, and I was just starting to wake up and, you know, understand that there's something more going on in this world. And it was actually, it was one night, as I said, I used to drive a minicab back in those days up in London in the West End. And, you know, I'd drive around London and pick up all these weird and wonderful people. And it was one night I was driving home. I had this massive epiphany, this spiritual awakening. And it was the first one. It was, you know, because before that I was, you know, very, you know, kind of sensed there might be something else to life, but I was so much in my mind that I wasn't awake. And it was driving home, I had this spontaneous epiphany, and I've never had it before, never had it since. And it was like this download, you know, something was activated in me. And I remember driving home, you know, with tears flooding down, you know, I was crying, you know, and I was never one to cry. I was brought up, you know, tough school and knocks and all that kind of thing. So here I was crying, driving home, and suddenly getting this feeling of love, you know, my heart was opening. And, you know, from that experience, I didn't know what it was. I woke up the next day thinking, what on earth was that? It was just amazing. But from that day onwards, I had a thirst for knowledge. And, you know, so I went to the local library and, you know, started looking for books on spirituality. And it was around that time I came across Louise Hays' book, because that was kind of taking off at the time. It was one of the first books in the sort of self-help movement. It kind of got it all going in the sort of modern days. And I just, it was so much in it that I needed, you know, the words and the things she was saying, that, you know, you've got control over your life if you, you know, do the inner work, and you're in control of your health as well. That was another important thing. And so it totally turned my thinking on its head, and I started to become much more empowered through that book and through subsequent books. And that was the first book, and it was so easy to read, and it was very understandable. You know, she had a very good way of, you know, delivering a message. And yeah, that really took me off on a positive path.
Well, your last book, number 10, it's a book that I've read, and I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't take it as far as you did. I haven't been on the ayahuasca journey, but this book made me want to. But I'm too much of a coward, you know. I like to keep self-control going. I don't like giving my power away.
Mate, that's all the more reason to take it.
Probably, yeah. I need to let go of something there. Shaman, healer, sage, Alberto Gallardo.
Yeah, that was a book that was recommended to me by a shaman in Panama, and it was myself and Nicola. She's actually on the call, on the meeting here.
So she is. Hi, Nicola.
Yeah, when we first were together, we went down to Panama and spent time with a shaman down there, because, you know, shamanism was really calling us at the time, and we'd heard about this guy who was really good, and we spent 4 months down there in a remote part of northern Panama called Boquete. And we lived very simply for those 4 months, and every day we spent time with the shaman, you know, doing the work, clearing our luminous energy fields, and, you know, giving thanks to the mountains and the animal spirits and all that kind of thing. And we loved it. We just immersed ourselves in it. And, you know, we were detoxing as well at the time. And, you know, and I remember for a week I didn't eat at all and immersed in this detox, but I had so much energy because I was doing this work, and learning about shamanism, and feeling really light and really clear. And it was such a lovely experience. It was so fantastic. And the shaman at the time, he recommended this book. And so I read the book, and, you know, it kind of confirmed everything he was teaching us. You know, and they say that one of the big teachings in shamanism is that, you know, your energy field is something that you need to keep very clear and clean, because, you know, if there are blocks in your energy field, they will manifest in the physical. And sometimes things hit you in the physical out of nowhere, and you think, well, where's that come from? But in shamanic teachings, they say that it's there. You know, they can read it, they can see it in your luminous energy field. So, you know, a lot of the work down there was about clearing this energy field and, you know, getting into a good place. And I always remember flying back after 4 months in the jungle and being on detox. We flew back to London and, you know, came back onto the M25 and just felt the heaviness of the UK. You know, the traffic, the pollution, people rushing around like headless chickens. And it took me a couple of weeks to get back into normal life, because our energy was like really clear and clean, and we've been in this different frequency. So yeah, just that taught me a lot, you know, just that the polarity of those experiences.
I remember interviewing you after you got back, and us having a conversation actually before the interview about, you were saying, I just don't know if I can live in England anymore now because of this. It was just so dense and heavy.
Yeah, well, it made me realise I had kind of outgrown the energy of the UK. I couldn't live there. I struggled after that, and so yeah, I've been, you know, we've been in Spain and Portugal ever since, pretty much. Yeah, Portugal, where we are now, it's very light and there's lots of space, and it's probably like England was back in the 40s and 50s. You know, there's a lot of greenery here still, but it's not the traffic and the pollution. And, you know, there's a lot of awakened souls here. So, you know, we are in our element. We love it here.
Mm. Well, that's your 10 books. Now, we always ask our contributors to give us between 3 and 6 nouns or short phrases that they feel best describe them. And I do this because, you know, I like it when they get a bit whimsical, or they say something a little bit unexpected and give us an insight into a personal part of them. And you chose hypnotherapist, author, publisher, musician, meditation teacher, and consciousness healer. Now, all of the others I understand. Tell me what consciousness healer means to you.
So for me, you know, I think we're pure consciousness. You know, our soul is pure consciousness. You know, but we're encumbered by the physical, and we're living in a 3D world. And you know, so a lot of those things, and we've got them. You know, the mind gets in the way, doesn't it? So for me, you know, the only thing that, not the only thing that matters, but one of the most important things you can do is to raise your consciousness. You know, to raise your vibration and your consciousness, and to expand. Because when you do that, you know, you tune into your true divinity, and you become lighter, and life is so much sweeter, you know, and you become so much more powerful as well. So, you know, for me, that's the journey to, you know, it's what I teach other people. It's what I try to do myself as much as possible. And, you know, but what I found is, you know, we're all a work in progress, aren't we? We're all on that journey.
Yeah.
You know, even hanging out with the shaman, although he'd immersed himself in shamanism. You know, he'd been in it since he was quite a young man, and he lived in that world. But, you know, he was still a human being, and we spending 4 months with him, we saw his ego a number of times. And so that was quite revealing, you know, because sometimes you meet people like that and you just presume, because they've got all the knowledge, that they're these ascended beings, they're avatars, you know, but, you know, there's been very few of them that have actually walked the earth. You know, we're all a work in progress. We're all on that journey. And, you know, and I want to keep doing this work, this raising of my consciousness. When I'm 90, I'll still be doing that and trying to get lighter and get clearer. And you know, you do it through what you read, what you watch, what you think about, what you say, what you eat, you know, how you exercise, how you look after your physical. And, you know, again, it's about putting in the work.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you do that, when you put in the work and the effort, the rewards are amazing. Because, you know, I mean, as I've said to you before, I was a kid that did everything and more, you know, drugs, you know, acid, heroin, you know, and fought at fights when I was a kid, and smoked, drank till my liver packed up when I was 17, and was in a very, very low vibrational place at that time. So I've seen life from both ends of the scale, if you like. And, you know, being in this place now, I think back to what I was like then, and I just can't comprehend it. You know, it's hard to even feel it. And sometimes I think, did I actually do those things? But I know I did, because people get in touch with me and remind me of them occasionally. You know,
Nobody's going to let you forget.
No. Fortunately, the internet wasn't around then, so there's none of my history is on the internet, thank God. But, you know, no, I was just
Other than what you've shared.
Other than what I tell people, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the sort of the glamorous side.
Well, you know, it's your journey is a very inspirational journey, because, you know, as you've you know, given us enough clues here, you did have a very dysfunctional family life. You didn't like being at home, so you would abscond and stay out all night, sleeping on benches. You went through, you know, you were thrown out of school, expelled. It all happened to you, and you were able to change it yourself. And I like to think, you know, for me, books are pivotal. You know, I couldn't imagine a world without books, because, you know, where else do we get ideas from? Yeah, we get education, but when we look at education today, it's not the kind of education that we actually need. as you said, you know, nobody taught us about Tesla and, you know, what he opened us up to. You have 3 sons. I know that the eldest is on a spiritual path and you have 2 small sons. If your younger ones came to you when they're older and said, Dad, you know, I'm really interested in following the spiritual path, which of these 10 books would you recommend they start with?
That's a really good question. I think probably the Bhagavad Gita, because, you know, for me it's got such purity in it, and you know, the teachings are so amazing. So I think, yeah, it would be that book, and I hope they do. I mean, my oldest son Lee's on that amazing path now, and he's, you know, he's immersed in it, and you know, now he's 32 and he's my teacher at times. You know, he tells me things that I hadn't heard before. So he's been on this amazing journey. And you know, just to give a bit of a backstory, Lee wasn't, you know, when he was a teenager, he grew up in Essex, and he says to me now, you know, he used to be obsessed with cars and having designer clothes and, you know, the hair looking right and going to nightclubs, and he says to me now, Dad, what do you expect? Essex is the vainest place in the world. You know, it's like, it's known for it. And but he had an awakening, you know, like I did, but when he was probably 25, it was actually after an ayahuasca ceremony, it opened him up. And then he went on this journey and it sped up his spiritual progress. You know, that's the way I looked at it and read it. And yeah, so much so that he's completely immersed in spiritual life, and he's just qualified as a hypnotherapist, and he's going to be so good at it. I've just recently passed on a load of clients, because I get asked all the time if I do one-to-ones, and I don't so much now. So perfect thing now, Lee's doing it, and you know, I'm kind of mentoring him and helping him, as his Nicola is as well. And he's going to be an amazing therapist because he's got natural empathy.
Yes.
He's a very kind soul. He loves people, and he's had that real life experience as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's doing a great job already. You know, he's seen a lot of clients.
That must be very gratifying.
Oh,
See your son, you know.
There's nothing I'd change about him. He's the most perfect human being. He really is. You know, I love him to bits, and and he's my best friend. He's my best mate. We talk every day, and we laugh all the time. And yeah, I'm very, very blessed in that way, that, you know, and I always say, if the other 2 turn out like Lee, I'll be a very happy man.
Well, how could they not? I mean, you know, I've never met Nicola. I've never met you in the flesh, but you and I have had many, many conversations, so I feel like I know you. But, you know, conscious parenting, how could they not? You know,
it's the start. We always say it's the start we always wanted.
Yes.
You know, healthy, vegan, conscious, you know, and you know, but we incarnate into lives that we choose for certain spiritual lessons, don't we? So I needed to incarnate in Balam in 1962 to a couple of unconscious parents to live, you know, to have the awakening and come through that, you know. So it's all meant to be in the divine picture.
Agreed. Okay, well, now we're going to open it for questions. So if anybody does have a question, I don't know if anybody's been posting any. And Jane is saying, I've enjoyed this so much. I can't see the rest of her message here. I've enjoyed this so much. She wants to know, what are you reading now? Good question, Jane. I should have asked that one.
At the moment, I mean, I'm kind of going over Autobiography of a Yogi through the audiobook. So it's because it's quite a long book, and it's an audiobook narrated by Ben Kingsley. So you've got his lovely Shakespearean voice, you know, delivering this wisdom that comes from the book. So I'm kind of, listening to that. And that's a really, so it's good because as I said, when I read the book initially, it was written 100 years ago, and it's quite deep, and you know, you don't always get it. So hearing it again for the second time through a narrator is great. You know, it's sinking in a bit deeper this time.
Good. Well, Jane says that you've inspired her to reread it. And it's interesting because Jane told me, she wrote to me after our first episode saying that, you know, a lot of people are saying they're kind of done with books now. But actually, I think what's happening is we're finding that we're not. It's really the kind of books. You know, we're done, I think most of us are done with the insubstantial books. And now what we want are the ones that really, like, you know, Yogananda, like Bhagavad Gita, these kinds of books that have substance to them, that really are meaty and useful.
Yeah. Well, there's this awakening going on, isn't there? You know, because more so now than ever, because of what we're going through, and you know, people are seeing all the corruption in the world. You know, it feels like there's this ascension. You know, people are wanting to know what's life about. You know, so there's this quest for knowledge. You know, en masse. That you know, so those kind of books are going to come into their own again. You know, they're going to be sought out. You know, and I think we need that more than ever. That spiritual wisdom.
Absolutely, and that's exactly why I started, you know, this book club, because we need the attention. There's some great stuff that's been around a long time, and it gets overlooked by. There's so much new stuff coming out. I just want to remind people, you know, about all the substance that is there.
It's been a great reminder, you know, just going over the books again and remembering what I got from them. You know, it's been a really good exercise. So yeah,
thank you, Glenn.
Yeah,
I don't think we actually have any more questions, although we are getting messages saying that thank you so much for sharing, and that people have enjoyed this. Robin says, I've enjoyed it too. Thank you for sharing. But Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sandie.
It's been delightful to have a different kind of conversation with you.
Yeah, it's been good. I was a little bit nervous about thinking about the books again, because yes, some of them I hadn't read for a long time. So I was thinking, you know, trying to get the essence of them and what they gave me and that kind of thing, you know. And so yeah, it's been good.
It's very easy to, you know, move on in life and forget. You know, I wrote in my bookworm about the power of now. I'd forgotten, you know, and I'd forgotten about Dan Millman's book. And it was only when I had to go back over them for a reason, an interview or something, that I thought, oh my God, yeah, this book really did move me.
Yeah. And it's easy to forget because you move on in life and things change, you forget about it. But yeah, they're pivotal. Some of those books are really pivotal in my life, you know, and turned the corner for me. So yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing them.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, well, actually, we've got a little gift from you, haven't we? If you go to the website and you look at Glenn's 10 best list, at the bottom of the page, you will find a link where you can download an app. Is that correct?
No,
Sleep Well.
It's an MP3.
MP3.
It is available as an app. It's a free app on the App Store, but it's an MP3 link that people can download. And that one, Relax and Sleep Well, is a very simple guided relaxation. And it's one I did ages and ages ago. And you listen to it, headphones on, last thing at night, you know, just allow yourself to drop into that relaxed state. There's some really nice affirmations on it towards the end. It's a kind of simple, straightforward introduction to my work. And it's actually been listened to, like, I don't know, probably about 8 million times on the App Store. And I put this out years and years ago. And so it's a really nice introduction. There's also a link to a meditation on YouTube called the Sonic Solfeggio 396 Hertz.
Right.
And that is a really good meditation for this time particularly, because Gregorian monks used to chant the 396 Hertz frequency to dispel fear. And so I made that recording along with Ali Calderwood for that reason. It's part of a series. So that recording's on YouTube. You can listen to that. It's 3 hours long, so you can listen to it for as long or as little as you like. And it's really good for letting go of fear and just
Yeah.
being centered and getting your strength back.
Yeah. So just go to the website and look up Glenn's 10 best list, and you'll see these at the bottom of the page. And if you haven't experienced Glenn's work, I have to say, I say this every time just because, I like, it suits my sense of humour. And I know that I'm not the only person who says this. But yes, I've spent many nights going to sleep with Glenn Harrold. Not in the flesh, but his apps in my ear. And they really are wonderful. So thank you, Glenn. Please do go to Glenn's website if you haven't visited it before, glennharrold.com. And he's got some wonderful self-help books, hypnotherapy apps, music recordings, and all kinds of goodies. So glennharrold.com. Glenn, thank you.
Thank you,
And
Sandie.
thank you, everybody, for joining us.